Good afternoon and welcome to Ozark Christian College and our next level seminars. My name is Dr. Gary Zustiak, and I am the head of the Counseling and Pastoral Care Department. So today I'm going to be bringing you a seminar on conflict resolution, or how to have a fair fight. One of the things that we just need to acknowledge in our life is that conflicts do happen. Maybe we should even say fights happen. And they happen even in good marriages, Christian marriages. They happen within the church. Conflict usually takes place when we feel threatened. We feel threatened because something that's very important to us may be taken away. Some of our values, attitudes, possessions are challenged, and they make us feel like our basic self-esteem perhaps is even threatened. And so when that happens, when we feel that we're going to lose something that's important to us, we come out swinging. Unfortunately, very few of us know how to fight in a productive way and, how to have a fair fight. And one of the reasons that we don't know how to deal with conflict well, for most of us anyway, it's because we've never seen it modeled well. We fight poorly because honestly, our parents fought poorly, and more is caught than is taught. So what I would like to do today is to share with you some specific techniques and principles that you can learn and put into practice that will help you and your mate, or you and your children, or you and your coworkers in dealing with conflict. There are some specific things that you can understand and put into practice that actually will help you in dealing with conflict without beating each other up. And really, that's what we want, is to be able to negotiate so that we come to an understanding, a resolution that everybody can live with. So first, let me talk to you about some barriers to communication. The first barrier is actually avoiding topics. Sometimes that's referred to as the elephant in the room. No one talks about it. No one wants to acknowledge it. This is when you just clearly, openly refuse to talk about a particular subject or subjects. And we may sidetrack conversations when somebody else implies that they're going to bring it up. You have to be willing to honestly lay it out on the table and deal with it constructively. Avoiding the topic doesn't make it go away. And there are some particularly hot topics that do seem to be more common that will come up in a marriage. Financial issues, sexual issues, disciplining the children issues, what we're going to do on vacation, those types of things. When one person brings it up, we must not try to run away from it and avoid it. It has to be dealt with. The next barrier to communication is content shifting. And that occurs when one person brings up a difficult issue and the other person responds by immediately changing the subject before any type of conversation can be engaged in about what that first person brought up. Now, the person who originally initiated the conversation has three choices that they can make in dealing with this person's changing the topic, their content shifting. So the first thing that you could do is you could insist on sticking to the topic at hand, but letting your spouse know that you're willing to discuss their topic at a later time, but you don't allow them to derail the conversation. You go, no, hey, look it, I brought this up. We have to talk about the finances. Now, if you want to talk about the way we discipline the kids later, I'm willing to engage in that. But I brought this up and we're going to deal with it now. Or you could just totally ignore the change in the topic and just say, hey, we're not talking about what you brought up. We're talking about what I want to deal with now. Or you could even respond to your spouse's change of subject and say, all right, if that's important to you, I'm willing to talk about that because I care about you. So we'll talk about your subject, but at a later time, we will get back to my issue. Under responsiveness is another barrier to good communication. And with this, a spouse, usually the husband, says too little in response to a particular question. Wives need more discussion. They need more detail than men do. So if you don't adequately deal with the issue, it doesn't go away. It just begins to fester. And then quibbling. Quibbling occurs when a person tries to clarify a dispute with an irrelevant detail. Quibbling often occurs in disputed versions of some past event because each person remembers it in a little different way. So one of my sons was a great quibbler. So let's say that he was supposed to be home at midnight. He got home at 5 till 2. And if I would jump in and say, all right, you're grounded because you got home at 2 o'clock, he would say, I did not get home at 2 o'clock. It was 1:55, as if that little detail actually made a difference. And so that's quibbling. When you try to bring up minutia, little details that don't really matter all that much, but they actually use them to derail the conversation and their responsibilities with it. Topic overkill really is a barrier to communication. And this is when you just keep speaking excessively on a particular topic, just repeatedly bring it up and you hash out the same subject over and over again. When you guys agree on a solution, I mean, it really truly needs to be a solution. That needs to be the end of that particular issue, or you really haven't resolved that issue. And the last barrier to communication I want to talk about is over responsiveness. And that's when you speak too long on a topic. Usually this one's the wife. And what is said goes beyond what's called for in the response to the spouse's talk. This is where you just go on, and the spouse doesn't have a chance to even respond to any specific points that were brought up. So everyone needs a chance to respond without forgetting what has been said. So try to make your point, concisely in a minute or two, let the other person respond, and then make your point, but don't over respond. So conflict is hard to deal with, but if you understand 5 different ways of approaching it, or 5 different styles or method, you may be able to successfully deal with conflict in ways that you never have before. As I said previously, conflict is just a natural part of living together or working together. There's conflict between spouses, between parents and children, between co-workers, between team players. Some conflicts are simply symptoms of something else. like stress, fatigue, overwork, or illness. Those things need to be taken in consideration. Others can be the result of serious, unresolved interpersonal issues. Most people do not deal openly with conflict because they've never been taught effective ways of dealing with it. So, on the positive side, conflict does provide opportunity for growth in a relationship. Unresolved, buried conflicts tend to arise from their grave and interfere with growth and satisfying relationships. So let me share with you 5 styles or 5 methods of dealing with conflict. So the first method or style of dealing with conflict is what I'm calling withdrawing. So you can, when a conflict arises, you can actually withdraw physically. And that is where you actually leave the room or leave the house. Or you can also withdraw psychologically. And that is, you might still be in the same room with your spouse or your coworker, but you have shut down emotionally and psychologically. Anybody else comes in and looks at you, I mean, they know there's nobody home. You have shut down, you have left psychologically. There are some advantages to withdrawing that I will share with you here in a minute. But the one thing you need to know is if you see withdrawing as from a conflict as a permanent solution, then that's very negative. It cannot be seen as a permanent way of dealing with conflict. It can only be a temporary way of dealing with a particular conflict. Because just withdrawing and avoiding it doesn't make the issue go away. So if you choose to withdraw as a temporary or a cooling off step towards using one of the other methods or styles, then it's very beneficial. And there are times when a conflict becomes so intense, it becomes so heated, it actually is best to withdraw because you don't want to say something or do something that you would regret. But it's important to make a definite and a specific commitment to discuss and resolve the conflict later on after you've had that period of withdrawal and of cooling off and thinking through better ways of presenting your side of the argument or the issue. I mean, think through if someone in just a heated, angry moment said something like to their spouse, "Man, I wish I'd have never married you." And later you're really sorry for that. And you explain, "I just said that because I was out of control." And that may be the truth and you're really sorry. But do you think your spouse would ever forget that? Probably not. And so that kind of a thing can cause some permanent damage. Or if it gets out of control and there's actual physical abuse that takes place because of the intensity of the conflict, that is not good. So you want to avoid that. Now, let me share with you very important insight that goes with this topic of withdrawing that comes from Dr. Gottman from his institute in Seattle. And Dr. Gottman identifies this particular issue and he calls it flooding. Flooding happens when you feel so overwhelmed by your partner's negativity or their criticism that you actually experience what I'm going to call system overload. And you can become extremely hostile or defensive. And once you're feeling this out of control, any type of constructive discussion is absolutely impossible. See, because what happens is we all have this kind of a built-in meter that measures how much negativity accumulates during a disagreement. And when the negativity gets to a certain level, when it gets too high, flooding begins. And flooding is the physiological response that we call the autonomic system, the fight or flight response. So under duress, we tend to release excess amounts of hormones like adrenaline that cause the heart to beat faster. The sweat glands work overtime, respiration begins to speed up. So these physical symptoms of stress create a feedback loop within the anxiety-producing thoughts that we are experiencing. And so this emotional flooding is basically just another name for the fight or flight response. And so once your physical arousal due to the fight or flight response, once it reaches a certain level, it becomes virtually impossible to think calm, rational, reasonable, soothing thoughts, or to even appreciate your spouse's point of view. Reason is impossible once this happens and the negative emotions take over. So how do you know if you're flooded? Well, under normal circumstances, the average man's resting heart rate or his pulse is somewhere between 70 and 72 beats per minute. Now, a woman's natural resting heart rate is higher. It's actually about 80 or 82 beats per minute. But when the heart rate goes up to about 80 beats per minute for a man and 90 beats per minute for a woman, the flooding process starts to begin. And once the heart rate reaches 100 beats per minute for women or men, then the fight or flight symptom is triggered in the brain. And so you become hypersensitive because adrenaline, noradrenaline, and norepinephrine, and all these different chemicals are released in response to the fight or flight symptom. And so you become just, because of that, hypersensitive to any negative emotions. And so you must physiologically calm down before you can have any kind of a constructive end to your disagreement. So how long does it take for the body to recover once it has been flooded? Believe it or not, it will take 30 minutes. Now, you might think after 10 or 15 minutes of withdrawing that, okay, I feel fine now. We can get back together, continue our discussion. Actually, no. Your brain still has, the adrenaline, the norepinephrine, all those chemicals going through it that are part of the fight or flight response. And what that does is it stimulates the amygdala, which is part of your emotional part of the brain. So once you're flooded, what do you need to do? Because you can see here that the amygdala is that part of the brain that gets flooded. So what do you do once that takes place? How do you get out of that? Well, you need to recognize your need for a timeout. So how do you know that? Well, are your fists clenched? Is your face red? Are you breathing fast? Are there tears streaming down your face? Is your voice breaking the sound barrier? Do you feel like screaming or throwing something? Are you afraid of the other person's intensity? Do you feel emotionally closed off? When you realize that flooding has taken place, when your heart rate is over 100 beats per minute, then you need to request a timeout for you. Okay, don't request a timeout for the other person. That is not going to go over well. If you would say, hey, you need a timeout, believe me, for adult spouses, that is not going to go over. But when you say, hey, look it, I need a timeout right now. Please give me 30 minutes minimum. And I promise we'll come back, we'll deal with this issue, but it will, if we continue without my getting a timeout, it will not end well. It will probably be ugly. Now, when you request the timeout and you do the withdrawal, use that time constructively. And so the way you do that is you relax, you calm down, you take some deep breaths, go for a jog, maybe even take a quick bath, write in a journal, read, pray, watch TV for a while. I mean, you know yourself. What relaxes you? Do something that's going to help you relax and recover from that emotional intensity. So it's important that you do get back together, though, and resolve the issue. And try to identify what is it that you were thinking and feeling that became so difficult to discuss with your spouse. Think about I messages that you could use to tell your mate what you were thinking or feeling. Instead of saying, you make me so frustrated, you say, well, I get frustrated when. And that way you're owning your own response. You're owning your responsibility to do something. Let your mate know what you were feeling. Try to spend some quiet time. Could also use this time to consider your mate's point of view. And you might be thinking, you know, they had a point. And I need to change that, or I need to acknowledge that. Think of a way how to share your point of view in a more effective way. So the first thing you do is to deal with the conflict is you can withdraw, but that's only temporary. The next way to resolve a conflict is to win. Now, if you feel you must always look after your own interests, or if your self-esteem is threatened in a conflict, you might choose the best way to end a conflict is for me to win. You know, no matter what the cost, I've got to win. Domination is usually reflected if this is your conflict resolution style, which means that personal relationships are always going to end up in second place. They're going to take a back seat if you have to always win. And sometimes you choose to win not out of domination, but out of desperation, because to lose means to lose everything. Now, it's unrealistic, but it can be just as damaging as domination. The win method achieves a goal, but if it's forced and not done correctly, it can sacrifice the relationship. In a marriage, personal relationships are just as important as a goal. And I want you to consider this. When we're in conflict, very rarely is the conflict over a moral or a spiritual issue. It's usually over just personal preference. And if the issue is just a matter of personal preference, you don't have to win that argument. Now, the only time that you must win an argument in a relationship, and doesn't make any difference if it's a spousal relationship or a parental relationship or even a co-worker relationship, is if the issue at hand is a moral or a spiritual issue, then you must win that argument. Now, what's the opposite of winning? You might think that it's losing, but actually it's not. I want to introduce to you a different concept. And it's not losing, but it's yielding. And I think of the example of Christ in Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 through 11. And here's what Philippians says: do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. So in your relationship with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage, but rather he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God highly exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. So when driving along a highway or approaching an intersection, you have probably seen a yield sign. Giving in to get along is another style. You may not like it, but you, rather than risk confrontation, you can choose this path of yielding. One of the benefits of yielding rather than winning is that it places a higher priority on the relationship. And here's the thing. Let me just give an example. Let's say that we, kind of a silly thing, we're going to go out for dinner. And I really want barbecue because I'm a man and I love barbecue. But my wife wants Italian. She wants pasta. And I say, man, I really, really want barbecue. And she's like, well, I would prefer pasta. And I'm like, man, but pulled pork just sounds so good. And then my wife says, well, I can see that you really have your heart set on barbecue. So you know what? I'm going to put my needs aside and we'll do what you want to do today. We'll go get barbecue. Now, I feel like a winner, but she's not a loser because I didn't force her to that decision. She voluntarily chose that. Now, and because she chose to put her own needs aside, I interpret that as her love for me. And so the next time when we have some kind of a conflict or disagreement, I'm going to remember what she did for me, and I'm going to look for ways that I can yield to her sometime in the future. And so it actually enhances my love and my concern for my spouse because she yielded. And that's what Jesus did. God didn't force Jesus to come to earth and take on flesh, but the Son voluntarily submitted to the Father's will. And what was the result of that? Now the Father has exalted him to a name that's above every other name, the name of Jesus. Now, the only time that yielding is not good is when it's a moral or a spiritual issue. So we have withdrawing, we have winning, we have yielding, but then there's also compromising. And so give a little to get a little. That's compromise. You might find that it's difficult to let up on some of your demands or ideas in order to help the other person give a little, but you don't need to win all the time, and you don't want to have to yield all the time. Compromise is an attempt to work out some needs that you want, but also to give up some so that the other person gains some of the things that they want. So going back to the dinner illustration, we want to go out. So I want barbecue, she wants pasta. I want barbecue, she wants pasta, and we settle on Thai. Now, with that, neither of us got what we wanted, but both of us got something that we could live with. And so in some sense, we both wanted it because we both like Thai, but it wasn't what we originally were in disagreement over. Now, again, there are times at which you cannot compromise a moral or a spiritual issue. That's the only time that you cannot compromise. Other times you could. What's the last one is resolve. And to resolve a conflict is when, using good communication techniques, you are sharing your ideas with your spouse, you're listening to your spouse or your coworker share their ideas over it. And actually, from this good interaction, you both in the end come up deciding on the very same path to choose on how to resolve the issue. So, which should you use in a marriage or a family or a work situation? Which of these 5 should you use? Withdraw, win, yield, compromise, resolve? The answer is all 5 of these should be used to resolve conflict or to resolve a fight. So let me give you a few other guidelines that are worth following that will enhance your ability to truly use some of these methods to create resolution. So here's some guidelines that are worth following. The first is when you're engaged in a conflict, or if we could even call the word a fight, do it in the right place, privately, one-on-one. This is very important in terms of the right place, doing this privately. I'll never forget, my wife and I were at a New Year's Eve church watch party. And, it's the typical, everybody brought stuff to eat. We snacked up until, about 11:30. And then the host gathered us all together and we were to go around the room, what we were hoping for the new year. And of course, most people were saying the things like, well, I'm hoping to lose weight, or I'm hoping to read my Bible more, or I'm hoping to get a promotion, or I'm hoping to finish my degree, those kinds of things. And we got to this one couple, and the lady says, well, I'm hoping for a divorce. And I mean, the room just got quiet. And we all just felt so bad for her husband, because what are you going to say? When you're in a room where there's, 14 other couples, that was not the right place to drop that kind of bomb, all right, on him. And so You need to choose the right place. And you need to have the right reason to engage in a conflict. There's probably a lot of right reasons. There's not just one generic rule about when to fight. But what's important is what is ultimately good for the overall relationship. What's good for both of you and not just the selfish needs of the one. And so that's the right reason. The right reason is you need to hash out this issue because it means that the entire relationship is going to be enhanced once you have worked through the issue. And that's true whether it's a family, husband and wife issue, or with parents with kids, or even in the workplace. And you also need to have the right attitude. The right attitude towards conflict resolution is be ready to listen, be ready to talk, but also, if needed, be ready to apologize and to forgive. Another great guideline is to practice careful listening. Practice careful listening. Proverbs 18:13 says, "He who answers before listening, that is his folly and his shame." James 1:19 says, "My dear brothers, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." And if you are truly wanting to increase your listening skills, I would encourage you to practice what I call the revolving discussion sequence. So sit down with your mate or your coworker or your child, whoever it is, and one person gets to talk for 2 minutes. The other person has to just listen for 2 minutes. Then at the end of 2 minutes, the person who's been listening has to say back everything that the person who was talking said without leaving anything out, without disagreeing with what they said, without changing or altering anything that that person said. And then that person doesn't get to talk until the first person who spoke verifies, "Yes, you heard me. You got it correct. Good job." Then it's the other person's chance to talk for 2 minutes. And they might respond, use their 2 minutes to respond to what the first person was talking about, or they might just bring up a whole nother issue that's important to them. But the same rules apply. The other person can't interrupt. They can't disagree. They can't change anything. They have to just say back, paraphrase everything that their spouse or their child or their coworker said, and until they get verification that, "Yes, you heard me." And so do that 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes for 20 minutes. And if you would do that 3 times a week, you would be amazed at how it reduces the number of conflicts that are in that relationship, because each person gets a chance to talk and to know that they have been heard. So careful listening also involves turning the cell phone off, turn the TV off, putting all those things down. So make sure that you practice good listening skills. Active listening is another term that's used. Another thing that you need to do is avoid stockpiling. Don't let things fester inside. I like this passage from Leviticus 19, verses 17 and 18. It says, "Do not hate your brother in your heart. Rebuke your neighbor frankly so that you will not share in his guilt." Think of the ramifications of this. See, you might have something that's really bothering you that the other person did. But if you don't tell them and give them the opportunity to ask for forgiveness and to mend and repair what they did, from God's standpoint, you're actually sharing in their guilt because you've not given them the opportunity to repent and to ask for forgiveness and to make reparations or amends, any of those kinds of things. So when I talk about stockpiling, avoid stockpiling, what that means is when conflict arises, when an issue arises, you actually deal with that issue as soon as is reasonably possible. You don't save up all of your conflicts and your issues until you get a whole bunch of them and then just dump every one of them out over the spouse because they're like totally overwhelmed. They don't understand what happened because they're aware of one thing that took place. But see, it's from your standpoint, it's not one thing. It's like 3 months worth of aggravations that you've saved up. And so now you're dumping out the whole box. That's confusing, overwhelming, and it's not fair fighting. So avoid stockpiling. Another way to help you resolve issues is select an appropriate time. Appropriate time and place to deal with the conflict. So choose a time when you're not going to be distracted by your mate's work schedule or key television programs, or when you need to choose a time when you're both relatively relaxed, sit face to face, keep good eye contact at the same level, and make a contract to discuss the issue of concern only and agree to avoid those ways of acting that sabotage the problem. Proverbs 15:23 says, "A man finds joy in giving an apt reply, and how good is a timely word." It's not helpful to wait until you're both in bed and about to sleep and then bring up, "I need to talk to you about something." The other person is just exhausted and they're not going to be able to give their full attention to the issue that you need to bring up. And so you need to talk about it at an appropriate time. So make sure that you choose that. I always like this little cartoon. "I'm too tired to argue. We have the rest of our lives to fight and bicker." Well, that's not the purpose of, choosing the right time, but you get the idea. You also need to select an appropriate place. So besides selecting the best time, choose an appropriate place to fight. Preferably, if it's a family situation, one that's away from the children. Select also a neutral place to fight, not one that gives an advantage to either person. And I suggest avoid using the bedroom for fights. You want the bedroom to be a place for rest, relaxation, recreation. Make love, not war, in your bedroom. And avoid fighting in public places. Don't go down to Applebee's, order an appetizer and then tear into your spouse so that everybody around you is listening in to the conflict. That's not fair fighting. So choose an appropriate place. Take it private and keep it private. Full-blown fights in front of the kids, it can have some real negative effects on them emotionally and spiritually if you don't talk about it with them later. And all it takes is something like, "Hey, you may have seen or heard mom and dad fighting last night. Well, we want you to know sometimes moms and dads have disagreements, but we've worked it out and everything's okay." Because if you don't do that, then in the back of their mind, what kids do is they will go to the worst case scenario and they'll go, oh, mom and dad are fighting. I bet they're going to get a divorce. Oh no. And what am I going to do with this and that? And so be careful that in terms of also how much information you give the kids about the fight. Make sure that you only give them that which is appropriate for them to know. You know, it's healthy for children to know that parents have disagreements, they have conflicts, but that they also get them worked out. And so Proverbs 15:18 says, a hot-tempered man stirs up dissension, but a patient man calms a quarrel. You need to have limitations. Set a time limit to avoid interminable fighting. Allow only a given amount of your precious time to be used in dealing with a particular problem. You may even set a timer and say, hey, look at 45 minutes, we're going to talk. And if we don't have this worked out at 45 minutes, we need to take a break. We'll come back to it later. Another thing you can do to help resolve conflicts, define the problem. Give specificity to it. You know, what do you see? Deal with the issue at hand. Keep it relevant. Stay on task. Focus on issues rather than attacking each other. Don't bring up old issues or grudges that are really not a part of the issue at hand. So put boundaries around the subject so it doesn't turn into a free-for-all. Also, use tact. Tact is when you state your position in a way that's sensitive to the feelings of the other person to whom you're talking. So let me give you some examples. Instead of saying, well, that's ridiculous, you could say something like, well, I can see some possible difficulties with that. Or instead of saying, well, that's totally stupid, you would say, well, let me try and have you look at this in a different way. Or how could anyone in their right mind think like that? Well, it'd be a whole lot better to say, I think there's possibly another position that has some good merit that could be, should be considered. Also, you want to eliminate you never and you always from your vocabulary. Because if you use you always or you never, I'll guarantee that they will always lead you to some place you don't want to go. Be flexible. Your next step is to state positively what behaviors on your part would probably help and to be willing to ask for the other person's opinion. So when your mate shares with you, be open to their feelings, their opinions, their observations, and their suggestions. Watch out for defensiveness on your part. Every person offers a willingness to make some degree of change so that they can move forward to a joint solution. So be flexible. Also, keep it in perspective. Be proportional in your intensity. You know, you don't kill a fly with a cannon. I mean, there's basically two types of problems that people have: solvable and unsolvable, or not solvable right now, you could say. So everything that you disagree on is not an earth-shattering issue. So you don't have to get mad and upset every time you think you have a cause that you need to be. And then last of all, allow yourself and your mate or your child or your coworker to retreat with dignity. how a conflict ends is really crucial. So recognize when the other person is doing something that's like an olive branch that is being offered. It might be disguised as an apology or even as a joke, but allow the other person a face-saving way out of the disagreement that you are having. So those are some ideas and suggestions that I would just share with you that would enhance your ability to deal with conflict and what I would call to have a fair fight. So we appreciate your tuning in today to Ozark Christian College Next Level Seminar, and pray your God's very best blessing on you and those that you work with.